so much. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be down here. I know it's going to get increasingly more crowded as this year and the next year goes, but that just goes to show that you must be doing something right down here. It's interesting because when I think about Florida and kind of what we've accomplished, I'm also thinking about next year's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and so we're doing America 250, and we're doing a lot of different stuff like that, and I'd like to think that when we're doing what we're doing now, that we're reflecting those principles. But I thought back to that founding era, and there was a debate that three of the founding fathers had. It was Dr. Benjamin Rush, Ben Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. And the debate that they were having was, what was the world's oldest profession? And Dr. Rush, as a physician, said, well, if you look at Eve was cut out of Adam's rib, so it must have been the physician, the doctor. You needed a doctor to be able to do that. Well, Thomas Jefferson, who, as you know, designed Monticello, University of Virginia, said no. The world's oldest profession is the architect, because it was the architect that brought order out of all the chaos in the universe. To which Benjamin Franklin replied, no, that's not true. The world's oldest profession is the politician. Who do you think created that chaos in the first place? And I can tell you, and particularly being down here in Palm Beach, when there are things that are done in other parts of this country that are not good by some of these politicians, we immediately see the effects of that. I mean, I think when de Blasio got elected mayor of New York City, I think the real estate in Palm Beach went up 15% in like the next few weeks. And I can guarantee you, if they elect this guy mayor in November, you will see an impact here in Palm Beach County. But in all seriousness, what we've seen in this country over the past 6 years in particular is a really sharp experiment. They say states are laboratories of democracy. We have 50 different states, different state governments. Even with the growth of the federal government over the last 75, 80 years, the states are doing most of the things that you rely on your day-to-day activities. And so we've been able to see that. And of course, having been governor during COVID, different states approach that differently, and we've been able to see the results. And I think what we can say about Florida is, the principles, the conservative values that we've led with have produced tangible and meaningful results. And that's true in and of itself, but it's even more true when you contrast that with the results of states like New York, like Illinois, and like California. And ultimately, it goes back to something that Calvin Coolidge said after he left office in pretty much probably towards the end of his life, because he didn't live that much longer after he left office as president. He said, it's a grave mistake to substitute the value of entertainment for the value of accomplishment when it comes to governance. Those two are not the same. So much of what goes on in the political realm is more entertainment quality. It's not necessarily geared to producing tangible results. But we've focused on, when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to follow through on it, and our job is to bring it in for a landing and actually make a meaningful difference. So let's look at Fiscal. We actually have probably about 4 million more residents than New York State does now. They have 19.5. We probably have about 23.5 million residents in the state of Florida. And yet, with millions of more people than they do, our budget is less than half of New York State's budget. Would you rather go to the DMV there or here? Are our roads better here or there? We have the #1 ranked higher education public, K-12, all these other things. And so just the budget of New York City, 8 million people, big city for sure, 8 million people, that budget is bigger than the budget of the entire state of Florida with 23.5 million people. And if you look at our state, if you take all the debt that the state has accumulated over its 180-year history, just since I've been governor, by the end of this fiscal year, we will have retired 50% of the state's total historical debt over 180 years. Now, part of that is we did an accelerated program. we'll go in, we'll buy the bonds at a discount, we'll retire them, we save a lot of money on interest. So it's been beneficial for taxpayers, but we now have the lowest per capita debt of any state in the United States of America, and that's a good thing. I think your share as a Florida resident for our state's debt's about $450. I think as a U.S. citizen, your share of that debt's about $120,000, so a little bit different in terms of what we're doing. So we've been able to reduce that. We also have a rainy day fund in Florida, and from the time I took office to now, we've more than tripled the state's rainy day fund, and we're actually maxed out. The Florida Constitution does not let us put in any more money into the rainy day fund, which I actually think is a good thing because you don't want to just be stockpiling. We have enough for cushion in case we have economic issues in this country, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that rainy day fund is maxed out, and then we have surplus revenue way over and above that we have there. The government of Florida is spending less in this current fiscal year than we spent in the previous fiscal year, and that fiscal year spent less than we did in the previous year to that. How many other places are actually reducing spending around this country? And so we're showing that it can be done. Now, some people say, well, yeah, but you got to do certain things. We've done really big things. We've done really big things that have had a lasting impact. I mean, just look at what we've done with Everglades restoration. That was something that had really kind of gotten on the skids when I became governor. You saw major problems in 2016 on the East Coast, 2018 on the West Coast of Florida. We pledged $2.5 billion my first year, first 4 years, $3.5 billion the next 4. We far exceeded that. We now have reservoirs east and west of Lake Okeechobee. We've done our part in the south of the lake. You have water flowing now to Florida Bay. You're not seeing discharges like you used to see because we can clean the water. So all this stuff has had a meaningful impact on the entire ecosystem and the backbone of the state of Florida. A lot of people said it couldn't be done, and we've been able to deliver massive numbers of projects, many of them ahead of schedule, and we've even gotten the Trump administration to delegate to us responsibility for some of the federal projects. The reality is this: there's a big difference between doing things on Florida time and doing things on Army Corps of Engineers time. Like, they're great folks. It's just a different mindset. It's a different bureaucracy. So we get things, we do it, and we bring it in for results. So now, because of that partnership, we're going to complete all the federal, the state will be done by then for sure, but we're going to do it 5 years ahead of where it was scheduled on January 20th, 2025. And so by the end of this decade, all of those projects will be complete. And that, quite frankly, was a pipe dream just 6 or 7 years ago. You look at what we've also done on infrastructure. So I've got a lot of places around this state that have traffic congestion. You have obviously people moving. I don't ever ask anybody to move to Florida because, quite frankly, it's like it's a free country. There's pluses and minuses, to be honest. I mean, some of our residents are like, well, we have too many people coming. All this. So I'm agnostic about that. You don't see me going to these other states begging. Now, we do bring law enforcement in because, quite frankly, they get treated poorly in some of these other states. But by and large, we don't. But the reality is people have voted with their feet. Florida has been the #1 state for net migration over the past 5 or 6 years. Incidentally, we're also #1 if you look at the adjusted gross income that's moved into Florida. Not only are we #1 in the country, we're #1 by a country mile over Texas, but we are also have had more adjusted gross income move into the state under my tenure as governor than has ever moved into another state in all of American history over a similar period of time, even adjusted for inflation. So that's a really big thing. But you have to meet needs of that. So we started a program to help with traffic called Moving Florida Forward. I took billions of dollars from our budget surplus. We had projects that were scheduled to take place 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before even groundbreaking. We're accelerating these now, and so we're going to end up delivering major projects 5 to 10 years ahead of schedule. How is that something? Do you ever see that in any other parts of the country? I mean, they end up taking, how long has it taken California to build a railroad, out there that's cost them $100 billion? So that is now already doing wonders to alleviate traffic in places like I-4 and whatever. You know, we're doing a big project on 395 down in Miami-Dade. It's a little tougher there because it's all built out, and you can't just find. Some of these other places I can find room to do different things. But the reality is that's a huge investment on things that makes a meaningful impact for people. Education. We have not raised tuition for any of our state universities 1 cent since I've been governor. So it's $6,300 for a Florida resident to be able to go to now the top-ranked public university system in the country 10 years in a row by U.S. News and World Report. We've been able to do that in part because we've invested resources in there. We also have a Bright Futures program where, honestly, if you can get into UF and some of these schools now, you usually can get your tuition taken care of. But we've had a big focus on supporting that, supporting people, not necessarily going to college, apprenticeships. We've more than doubled those since I've been governor. And then K-12, you know, we have the highest per pupil spending we've ever had. Not that that's a great barometer, because some of the places that spend the most money are horrific school systems around this country, but we have shown a willingness to put resources there, including, you know, because people will say, you know, pay teachers more. Well, the way Florida works, if you increase money, it goes to the school districts, and then they divvy it up how they see fit. So there's bureaucracies that get serviced. There's other things that get serviced. So we created with the legislature something called a categorical teacher pay appropriation. So we started with $500 million. This year we did $1.38 billion. And it can only be used to increase teacher salaries. And so the school district's hands are tied, and they've got to do that. And so we've been able to take the average minimum salary. It was like $40,000 when I became governor, and now it's about $50,000 statewide, so a 20% increase. So, and I think it's been good, but the reality is that's a big investment. That's a multi-billion-dollar investment. So, and not only have we been able to do big things there, we've done more tax relief than ever has been done in the history of the state of Florida. You know, the thing about, we don't have an income tax, and we never will as long as I have anything to say about it, but it's harder to cut taxes when you don't have that. We use sales taxes mostly, what the state does, and your food has never been taxed, the groceries, medicine, things like that. We've also made baby items permanently tax-free. So your diapers, wipes, strollers, cribs, all that stuff is no longer taxed in Florida. We didn't end up signing that into law till I think about 4 or 5 years into my tenure, just as my youngest was getting out of diapers. My wife asked me, why didn't you do this your first year? We would have saved a lot of money, but you know, you get there. So we do that. So we've done, and we also were the only state that had taxed commercial rent. We eliminated the business rent tax in the state of Florida. How many places are abolishing taxes like we are? So billions and billions of dollars of tax relief, including eliminating taxes like the business rent tax, doing big things that benefit the state, and yet paying down debt and running surpluses and even decreasing your budget year over year for the last 3 years. So don't tell me this can't be done. It can be done. And we've shown that it can be done. We also had to deal with certain challenges. And when COVID-19 happened, you saw, I think, a hysteria take hold in the media amongst some of our professional classes that, you know, as you looked at the data, was just not consistent with what the data was showing. And so the decisions we were having to make early in that were not popular at the time. Certainly, I got a lot of flack from media, political opponents, even people in my own party, and we were going against the machine. But, you know, I looked at it and I was like, you gotta have people have a right to work and put food on the table for their family. People have a right to operate business. Kids have a right to be in school and learn in person like it was supposed to be. So we went and we charted that course. And, you know, you had some local governments, Palm Beach, Miami, some of those that were very restrictive. And I had to come over the top rope at some point and just say, no, we can't do this anymore. We have got to make sure everybody, this all applies statewide. We're not going to be, you know, I'm not going to let you fine people if they don't have a mask on. I'm not going to let this, I'm not going to let that. And we got a lot of flack for that. You know, it's interesting, though. Now everyone claims they were for what I was for all along. They weren't at the time. But, you know, so I was in a situation where I was kind of on an island. I didn't have a lot of air cover, certainly no air cover in the media or anything like that. But I knew that this was the right path, and I wanted people to be able to make their own decisions. And so I had people just tell me, well, just mandate masks. Just do something just so people don't. No, I'm not going to do that. A lot of people said you're going to have really tough time politically unless you do that. And I did not know whether that was true or not, but I also knew my job as a leader was to care more about protecting the jobs of the people I was elected to serve than I was about protecting my own. And if it didn't work out for me politically, so be it. Now, that was a time to lead. And I can tell you, looking back, if you look at Florida's success, the trajectory, it would not have happened had we allowed this state to descend into a Faucian dystopia. It would not have happened had we not empowered people and protected their rights when it really, really mattered. And so if you look at now, CNBC. CNBC ranks Florida #1 economy of all 50 states 3 years in a row. You know, when I became governor, the idea that we would ever be ranked ahead of Texas or some of these other places was kind of considered a pipe dream. And now we've really let it. That would not have happened had we not separated ourselves during COVID. Obviously, you saw a lot of activity in this county and throughout southern Florida in particular. But, you know, that's just about doing the right thing when it matters, even when it's not easy. And that's one of the things that I think that it kind of gets lost in the whole political sphere is if it was easy to lead on these things, everyone would do it, right? Leadership has a cost. And when you get out there and lead, people are going to swing at you, people are going to attack you, and you got to shoulder on and do what you think is right. And it's interesting, as much as everyone was saying during COVID and other times during things we've done that have been impactful, oh, you know, the polls are bad or this or that. I can tell you this, since I've been governor, the number of polls I've taken about issues and about what I'm going to do on an issue is, I know exact number of polls, 0. I've not done it one time. Because first of all, what is a poll going to tell me? I can phrase it one way and get one result. I can phrase it another way and get a different result. But it's also a static analysis. If I have the vision and I believe in what I'm doing is right, and I do it and I execute and deliver results, even if people weren't for it at the time, then they end up being supportive. That's what happened during COVID. That's what's happened during a lot of these other things. So being willing to lead and take the flak, I think, is really important. And we've had other battles, too. You know, we have universal school choice in the state of Florida. There were a lot of school unions that didn't like that. We also did paycheck protection for dues for school unions. You know, they have, you got to give, you got to give. A lot of the teachers didn't want to give. So now they can't take it automatically out of paycheck. So that has been a huge battle. Crime. You know, you have this issue around the country where you have these prosecutors that get massive amounts of funding from people like Soros, and they get elected, and their platform is to not enforce the laws and to actually let criminals back on the street. We've had people move to Florida, I can tell you because they've told me the stories, who left San Francisco, left LA, left Chicago, left these places because they're not holding people accountable. Well, we had 2 of those prosecutors that got elected in Florida. They got in, one in Tampa, one in Orlando. They were not satisfying their oath of office. They were not faithfully enforcing the law. So I was the only governor in America that's actually removed derelict state attorneys from their posts. We removed both of them. And I'll tell you, there's times when you do things like education, school, you know, you think you're helping people. I think you are, and what would happen if someone didn't have a scholarship, or what happened this? And it may be very bad. But on those issues, I can tell those decisions absolutely save lives because they were replaced by prosecutors who weren't going to use the justice system as a revolving door and were actually going to hold criminals accountable. And, you know, people say, oh, you know, your inmate population has increased, you know, in Florida. Well, that's part of the reason why we have a 50-year low in the crime rate. there's folks that need to be held accountable. So we were able to do that, and we've worked very closely with local law enforcement. Our state agencies have worked very closely with them. We started this program, well, during COVID, we did $1,000 bonuses for all police and fire and EMT 3 years in a row. And then we did a recruitment bonus of $5,000 that new law enforcement officers from within the state, the younger people, and recruits from out of state. If you come from San Francisco to Palm Beach, let's say, Sheriff's Department, you get a $5,000 bonus right off the top. That is a signal that we've got your back. Yeah, the money's nice. $5,000 isn't what it used to be, and kind of before inflation, it was a lot different. But it's helpful on the margin for folks, but that's not what really is the impact. The impact is, the state of Florida cares about what we do, that they're going to give a $5,000 bonus to start, and this is reverberated around the country. I mean, I remember I was on the West Coast a couple years ago, and I talked to a police chief in one of the nicer areas of Southern Cal, and I said, how you guys doing? He's like, I'm doing great, Governor, but all my police officers want to move to Florida now, and that used to not be the case. And so we've been able to do it. So we're a law and order state. We've not only talked the talk, we've walked the walk. It's not just statistics to say we have the 50-year low in the crime rate. That has an effect on people's lives. And of all the people that have moved to Florida, and they talk about different reasons, yeah, no income tax, yeah, during COVID, people were fleeing some of the madness, yeah, there's problems in education, some of these other states. All those are factor. Number one factor, by far, public safety. People didn't feel safe in some of these places, and so Florida was really the refuge. So we've led and we've delivered on that. We're also working, I think, delivering big results on higher education. I mentioned we have #1 ranking 10 years in a row by U.S. News and World Report, which is great, but we have a lot more that needs to be done. And one of the problems that you've seen, and we saw it after the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack against Israel, where these college campuses ended up becoming like law-free zones almost. Crazy rioting, targeting Jewish students and faculty, also Columbia University, some of these places, letting the inmates run the asylum. That doesn't fly in the state of Florida. And so you didn't see that happen. You didn't see that happen in our universities, and some people have told me, man, you're really lucky that didn't happen in Florida. And I tell them, luck don't have nothing to do with it. Any university president in the state of Florida knows that if they were to allow their campuses to descend into Columbia-style anarchy, they would find themselves no longer being presidents of a university in the state of Florida. It's just accountability. And look, we've been battling stuff with the culture of higher ed for a long time, but I think that really showed a lot of people that there's a lot of rot that's been allowed to develop over the years in these universities. And so one of the things we did that no other state did at the time, I think some are trying to emulate, we now in Florida, for our state universities, all tenured professors must undergo review every 5 years and can be terminated for poor performance. That is going to it's already making a really big difference in filtering out. The purpose of university is not ideological indoctrination. The purpose of a university is pursuing truth, upholding high standards of academic excellence, and ultimately preparing our students to be citizens of this republic. And so we're embracing that classical mission of what a university should be, and people are responding overwhelmingly as a result of that. We also have had to do a lot of different stuff in terms of managing this, that, or the other thing, but just on a political point, because I think it's instructive. I'm talking about results, I'm talking about all this stuff, talking about leadership, what we've done. And the substance is really what matters, right? I mean, if we do something good and it improves your life, whether I get any credit or not for it is irrelevant, and I don't seek it. But what is the political verdict on all the stuff that we've done? Well, when I got elected governor in 2018, Florida was the #1 most competitive state politically in the United States and had been for 20 years, maybe more. Every major election, governor, presidential, in that decade, decided by 1 point or less. Mine was even less in 2018. We had 300,000 more registered Democrats than we did Republicans in November 2018 when I first got elected. And so I came in, we acted very boldly across these and other issues, delivered results. And so what happened politically on that? Well, 4 years, fast forward 4 years, November of 2022, Republicans didn't have a 300,000 registration deficit. We all of a sudden had a 300,000 registration surplus, 600,000 net shift in the registration. What did that yield in November of 22? It didn't yield a 1-point victory. Our re-election victory was the biggest Republican victory in the entire history of the state of Florida for a governor's race. 1.5 million vote margin, including being the first Republican to win this county in 40 years, by the way, which we were. Going into that election, everyone's like, oh, can Republicans be, 2016 presidential election, Miami-Dade and Broward, and Palm Beach, I think they went 20, 30 points for Clinton over Donald Trump. And so but Miami seemed to be changing. So they're like, well, maybe Miami can be competitive. And like, we knew about a month out, like, yeah, we're going to win Miami-Dade. That's not a problem. We ended up winning that by double digits. So then the question is, can you do Palm Beach? And probably about 10 days before the election, we're like, yep, we've got Palm Beach. We did Osceola, and then Orange with Orlando. Can we get Orange? And we're just like, I don't know that we can do that. That's a little too liberal for us. We did good, but not good enough to win. So, and then fast forward today. We were 300,000 in the hole in 2018 for registration for Republicans. Now it's 1.3 million more registered Republicans than Democrats. I mean, that's a big change. That's people behaving in ways that are validating what you're doing. And so not that the political thing is the most important, because you do the right thing for the right reasons and let the chips fall where they may, but the fact of the matter is, we have seen movement, not just from people moving here, but also from people shifting from one to the other. I think you've been 3 times more likely to shift from D to R in the last 6 years in Florida than vice versa. It's interesting, when COVID was really, the COVID migration was really happening, I'd have some of my friends and supporters down here were worried. You see all these New York license plates, and they're like, well, gee, the governor won by 35,000 votes. If we bring in 50,000 Dems from New York, then we may not win the next election. So they literally would go to Publix, they'd find New York license plates, and they'd put flyers in the windshield. Don't vote down here like they do up there. And there was a fear of this. And then when the California license plates started showing up, oh my gosh, people were really scared. They didn't want to import Berkeley into like Central Florida. It would have been tough politically. But here's the truth. You look at all 49 other states over the last 6 years, and you look at who's moved to Florida. Every single one of those 49 states, more Republicans have moved to Florida than Democrats have moved to Florida. I don't think you could ever find that type of statistic in the history of modern American politics. And so it does show on a political level, the validation. So final point I'll make is this. I'm happy to take some questions. We have to deal with, issues. Hurricanes, for example, knock on wood. Nothing brewing in the Atlantic right now that seems like it would do. Every day we get by, man, we are so much closer to the promised land. I'll tell you, if we get through with none, it would be very good for this state in a variety of reasons. You just deal with it. When we're ready, we work with the utility companies, we do all this, we get all this stuff done. We had bridges knocked out after Hurricane Ian. We rebuilt one in 3 days. We did the other in 2 weeks, the Sanibel Causeway. I think in some states those would have been out 6 months. I just think it's bureaucracy, it's red tape. We don't do it. So a lot of it is just getting things done, but then taking a step back, we're also in kind of this broad sweep of, can we govern ourselves in this country or not? And I look at some of the things that have happened in Washington over recent years. I mean, we're $37 trillion plus in debt. You look at how gold and silver are really going up. That's a lack of confidence in how the government's spending money, how the Fed's managing all this stuff. You see it. So can you do it? And it goes back to really the founding of this country. First of all, when we celebrate 250, this is something that particularly our young people really need to appreciate, because our founding fathers, they were not just kind of on the fringes of society. These were all very eminent and successful people. And so when they went to Philadelphia in 1776, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. That was not just like popping off on social media would be today. If they did not succeed in winning independence, every single one of them would have been put to death. And so they understood that. They also understood a third of the colonists wanted to stay with Britain. A third just didn't care, apathetic. They were apathetic even back then, and just like we have many now. And so they had about a third of the colonists that actually believed in what they were doing. And it was very principled. They were not actually being overtaxed as we would consider that today, but it was the principle. If someone could tax you even a little bit without having representation, you're giving up your freedom to give away that power to somebody that you don't have a say in holding accountable. And so they were willing to risk it all for a very important principle, and also just the idea about, where do your rights come from? They believed, as the Declaration said, endowed by God with certain unalienable rights, and then the people loan the power to the government to protect those rights. But those are pre-existing rights. Those are not rights that the king is granting to you, which is how most people conceived of politics back in those days. The Founding Fathers bucked that trend and did it. So they put it all on the line, and we should appreciate that. They also, it wasn't easy. Just winning the war was not easy, but then actually creating a framework where you could have success. They win the war and things are really falling apart. They didn't have a federal government that could really do anything. Some of the states were out of control. And so they meet in Philadelphia the next decade, 1787, to try to create a constitution. And they show up to Philadelphia, very eminent people, Washington, Franklin, Madison, Hamilton, a bunch of them. And they had studied the sweep of history. They studied every republic in the history of mankind. And the one thing that they saw that all those previous republics had in common, and there was really only one, constant, and the constant was this: every single one of them had failed. And so they really believed that what they were doing was going to answer the question once and for all. Can people really govern themselves? Can you have a society based on the idea that, yes, our rights are God-given, not government-granted? Yes, we live under rule of law, not the rule of individual men. Yes, government needs to be limited and confined to its proper sphere. Or are we forever destined to live under various forms of despotism? And they believed that this country would ultimately answer that question. But they also didn't think that Benjamin Franklin said, he agreed to support the Constitution. He's like, I don't know that we can do any better. I got reservations, but I don't think we can do any better, so I'm for it. It wasn't that they thought that would end it. In fact, when Franklin walked out of that convention, he was asked, Dr. Franklin, did you give us a republic or a monarchy? And his answer was, a republic if you can keep it. They understood you could have the best Declaration of Independence in the world, the best Constitution in the world. These things don't run on autopilot. They require every generation of Americans to defend them, defend freedom. Sometimes that means even putting on a uniform, risking your life, and even giving the last full measure of devotion for service to this country. And so when we're doing what we're doing and we're dealing with all these important issues, we also got to be mindful of this is still an experiment. This is still an experiment about whether free people can actually govern themselves successfully. And I like to think, I know it's the case that what we've been able to do in the last 6 years in Florida shows that, yes, not only can you do the right thing, not only can you deliver results, but you can thrive like the states never thrived before. So thank you all. God bless you. I'm happy to take some questions.